The morning light spilled through the vast windows of the Davidson International penthouse office, slicing across polished marble floors and gleaming brass fixtures. Nancy Rodriguez knelt by the reception desk, her knees aching against the stone, the lemon scent of industrial cleaner clinging to her hands. 6 hours into her shift, the muscles in her back throbbed, but she kept moving, polishing away every smudge from the spotless glass. This job won't afford was the difference between rent paid and eviction, between her daughter's scholarship and nothing at all. She glanced at the clock. Just 30 more minutes and she could be gone before Robert Davidson noticed her existence. The man's shadow alone could make the air feel colder. She had seen him exactly twice in the months she'd cleaned here, tall, perfectly tailored, his expression like a wall no one could climb. He ruled his empire from this penthouse office high above Manhattan, commanding billions with a flick of his wrist. The kind of man who never bent down to pick up what he dropped. The elevator chimed behind her. Nancy's stomach sank before she even turned. Emma, her 8-year-old, came skipping out, clutching her worn backpack, dark hair into pigtails bouncing as she crossed the marble floor. "Mama, school let out early. A water pipe broke," she whispered, as if announcing a grand adventure. Nancy's heart tightened. "You know you shouldn't come here. Miss Wilson dropped me off. She said it was on her way." Nancy sighed. Her neighbor meant well, but this was dangerous. One wrong move, and she could lose this job. "Stay in the break room until I'm finished." Quietly, Emma nodded, though her wide brown eyes were already wandering, taking in the glimmering chandeliers and gold-framed paintings. Nancy bent over her mop, working faster, her mind on the rent due next week. Then the phone rang. Not the main office line, the other one. The special red phone on Robert Davidson's desk. She'd been told that line was sacred, reserved for the most important clients in the world. She froze, glancing toward the conference room where Davidson's deep voice rumbled through a closed door. "Where is everyone?" he barked from inside. The red phone rang again, shrill in the empty space. Nancy stepped toward the conference room to fetch him, but when she looked back, Emma was perched on the edge of Davidson's chair, small fingers curled around the receiver. "Davidson International," Emma said brightly, her voice steady and professional. "How may I help you?" Nancy's blood ran cold. There was a pause. Then Emma's expression shifted. When she spoke again, it wasn't in English, it was in flawless, liquid Arabic. Her voice softened, respectful, flowing with the kind of cadence Nancy hadn't heard since her years in the linguistics program. Nancy stood rooted to the spot as the conference room door swung open. Davidson emerged, frowning, ready to scorch the air with whatever words he had prepared. But then he heard her. He stopped mid-stride, eyes narrowing as the foreign syllables rolled from Emma's mouth with effortless grace. She listened, nodded, jotted notes in a quick, confident hand. Switching back to English without missing a beat, she said, "Mr. Davidson is unavailable at the moment, but I'd be happy to take your message." She scribbled something, then returned to Arabic, her small voice authoritative, almost regal. Robert Davidson did not interrupt. He stood in the doorway, watching her with an expression Nancy had never seen on his face: curiosity, calculation, and something sharper, like the glint of a blade catching light. When Emma finally said, "Shukran, Mr. Al-Farsi, ma salama," and placed the receiver gently back in its cradle, she turned toward them with a smile that seemed oblivious to the weight of what had just happened. "Mama," she said cheerfully, "that was Mr. Khalid Al-Farsi from Saudi Arabia. He says the deal is ready, and the $866 million will be transferred once Mr. Davidson calls him with the final approval." Codes. The color drained from Davidson's face, but his gaze locked on Emma. "How?" he asked slowly, his voice almost a whisper. "Does an 8-year-old speak Arabic like that?" Before Nancy could answer, Emma beamed. "Mama taught me. I know 7 languages." Davidson's eyes sharpened further, the beginnings of an idea dangerous and magnetic taking root. Nancy's hands still trembled as she led Emma away from Davidson's desk. The notepad clutched against her daughter's chest like a secret treasure. She wanted to scold her, wanted to remind her how dangerous it was to touch anything in this office, but the shock in Robert Davidson's eyes lingered in her mind, a look she doubted many people had ever seen. Davidson stepped back into the room, his long strides deliberate, his tailored suit whispering with every movement. "Miss Rodriguez," he said, his voice cool, but carrying a weight that made Nancy's pulse quicken. "You and your daughter will wait for me in my office." Now, it wasn't a request. The private office was nothing like the rest of the penthouse. Here, dark mahogany panels absorbed the light, and the air smelled faintly of cedar and old money. A massive desk dominated the center, but it was the view that stole your breath. Manhattan stretched out like a living map beneath the rain-streaked glass. Nancy sat on the edge of one of the leather chairs, Emma beside her, swinging her feet and oblivious to the electric tension humming between the walls. Davidson entered without ceremony and closed the door with a quiet click. He didn't sit. Instead, he circled the desk like a predator gauging the right angle to strike. "I've been chasing Khalid Al-Farsi for 3 years," he began, each word slow and precise. "Do you know how many translators I've burned through? How many negotiations stalled because he refuses to conduct business in English?" Nancy shook her head, unsure if answering would make things better or worse, and yet Davidson continued, his gaze shifting to Emma. "This child just handled him as if she's been doing it her whole life." Emma smiled shyly. He was very polite and funny. Davidson's eyes narrowed, not in malice, but in calculation. "You speak 7 languages," Emma nodded. "Arabic, Spanish, French, Mandarin, Russian, Portuguese, and English." She counted them off on her small fingers, proud of each one. "Who taught you?" "Mama," Emma replied instantly. "She says languages are keys to other worlds." For the first time, Davidson's expression softened, but it was fleeting. He turned his attention back to Nancy, the warmth gone, replaced with a sharp edge. "I want to know everything. How you taught her, where you learned." Nancy hesitated. She had guarded her past fiercely for years, not because she was ashamed, but because it hurt too much to revisit. But the way Davidson's gaze pinned her left no room for deflection. She told him about Georgetown, her near-complete PhD in linguistics, the professor who abandoned her when she became pregnant, the scholarships lost, the doors closed. She told him about nights spent translating documents for pennies while Emma slept beside her, the lullabies in Spanish, the bedtime stories in Mandarin, the breakfast conversations in French. Davidson listened without interruption, his fingers drumming slowly against the desk. When she finished, he straightened. "You're wasting your talent scrubbing floors." "I'm surviving," Nancy replied, meeting his gaze, "and giving my daughter what I can." "That's not enough," he said flatly. "Not for her, not for you." He pressed a button on his desk phone. "Jana, cancel my afternoon meetings. Prepare an employment contract for Miss Rodriguez, Chief Multilingual Communications Specialist. 200,000 starting salary, full benefits, flexible hours." Nancy blinked. "I don't understand." "Yes, you do," Davidson said, leaning forward. "You and your daughter just saved an $866 million deal. I don't let assets like that walk out the door." The word assets made something cold settle in her stomach, but Emma's eyes lit up, and Nancy felt the dangerous pull of the offer. Then Davidson added, almost casually, "And there's a condition. Emma will attend Carmichael Academy, the best. They'll know what to do with her abilities. What's wrong with her current school? Nothing except it can't open the doors I can. Think about it." He slid a folder toward her, the Carmichael crest embossed in gold. Nancy glanced down, and for the first time, felt the ground shift beneath her feet. She wasn't sure if she was stepping into a dream or a trap. Nancy had never seen a place like Carmichael Academy. The first morning she walked its marble corridors beside Emma, she felt as if she'd stepped into another world, one where even the air seemed to carry the weight of old money. Oil portraits of senators and CEOs glared down from paneled walls, their gilded frames catching the morning light. The floors were polished to a mirror sheen, and everywhere she looked were children in immaculate uniforms, their blazers crested with a golden "C." Emma clutched her mother's hand, her small fingers warm but tense. She wore her own uniform for the first time, a gift from Davidson's personal tailor delivered the night before. It fit perfectly, but somehow the crisp lines and deep navy couldn't disguise the difference. Emma didn't belong to this world. Not yet. The headmistress, Margaret Winters, approached with a smile so thin it could have been cut from glass. "Ms. Rodriguez, Miss Vega," she said, deliberately using the formal version of Emma's last name, as if smoothing away any hint of their past. "We placed Emma in our accelerated program. Her language assessments were extraordinary." Nancy thanked her, but caught the way Winter's gaze flicked over Emma's shoes-polished black leather. But not the brand all the other children wore. Emma's first class was French. It should have been her moment to shine. Nancy watched from The back is the teacher, a middle-aged man with a precise Parisian accent, instructed the students to recite a passage aloud. When it was Emma's turn, she didn't just read the words, she corrected his pronunciation, softly, respectfully, but without hesitation. A ripple of laughter moved through the class. The teacher's smile tightened. "Perhaps in your dialect, mademoiselle," he said, his voice like ice, "but here we use the Paris standard." Emma's brow furrowed. "I learned from the Académie Française recordings, sir. That is the Paris standard." More laughter. This time, sharper dot by lunch, the whispers had started. "Scholarship girl. Thinks she's smarter than everyone." One child, a girl named Alexa, with blonde hair so perfectly braided it could had been sculpted, glanced at Emma's shoes and asked loudly, "Did you get those from the garbage?" Nancy heard about it only when she was summoned back to the school mid-afternoon. She found Emma in the hallway outside the headmistress's office, cheeks flushed, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "I didn't do anything wrong, Mama," she whispered. Winners emerged, her voice cool. "While we appreciate Emma's talents, challenging the teacher's authority is unacceptable." And there was an altercation with another student over personal belongings. "You mean when a girl mocked my daughter for not wearing designer shoes?" Nancy kept her voice level, but inside, anger churned. "This is a prestigious environment, Ms. Rodriguez," Winners replied. "Social harmony is important." Before Nancy could answer, a voice from behind made everyone turn. "I couldn't agree more," Robert Davidson said, stepping into the hallway. His presence was like a sudden shift in gravity. Teachers straightened, students fell silent. He glanced at Winners. "Is there a problem with my protege?" Winners hesitated. "Nothing we can't manage, Mr. Davidson." Davidson looked down at Emma, then back at Nancy. "Why don't I take her this afternoon? We'll get her proper supplies, the right books, the right clothes, everything she needs to fit in." Nancy hesitated. "That's not necessary, I insist," Davidson said, his smile smooth, but his tone brooking no argument. "It's an investment in her future, in our future." Emma's eyes lit up, eager for a chance to escape the day's humiliation. "Please, Mama." Nancy forced herself to nod, but as she watched Davidson place a hand on Emma's shoulder, a chill slid down her spine. His touch wasn't fatherly, it was possessive, a claim. Hours later, when Davidson returned Emma to their apartment, she carried shopping bags filled with the finest stationery, imported leather shoes, and a sleek tablet loaded with advanced language software, but she also carried something else, an ornate, jeweled music box. "He said it's for when I miss him," Emma explained, winding the key. The box opened, not with music, but with a recording of Emma's own voice, speaking in every language she knew. Nancy's breath caught. "When did you record that?" "I didn't," Emma said, puzzled. "It just knew." That night, long after Emma had gone to bed, Nancy turned the music box over in her hands. The metal felt unnervingly warm, as if it had been held for hours. She noticed tiny vents hidden in the filigree, and beneath them, what looked disturbingly like a microphone, and in that moment, she understood Davidson's gifts were never gifts. They were keys to a lock she hadn't even seen yet, and the lock was closing around her daughter. The following morning, Nancy carried the music box in her tote bag like a piece of unexploded ordnance. She couldn't shake the unease that had gripped her since the night before. Every time she thought of Emma winding that ornate key, and the sound of her own 8-year-old voice spilling out in 7 languages, it made her skin prickle. At Davidson International, she locked herself in her new corner office, drew the blinds, and placed the music box on her desk. She studied it in the quiet hum of the skyscraper. The detailing was exquisite, hand-enameled blossoms edged with gold, tiny rubies glinting in the filigree, but beneath its beauty, Nancy saw only deception. She turned it over, searching for a maker's mark, but found instead a hairline seam along the base. Using the blade of her letter opener, she pried it open with a sharp click. Inside, nestled between gears and springs, was a sleek, wafer-thin device no bigger than a postage stamp. A blinking green light pulsed like a heartbeat. Her stomach dropped. She knew what it was: micro-recording technology capable of weeks of audio storage, with a wireless transmitter to send files to an off-site server, the kind used in corporate espionage cases. She translated legal documents for in her freelance days. Whoever had built it knew exactly what they were doing. A knock at her office door made her snap the box shut. Davidson stood there, framed by the glass like a silhouette in a portrait. His eyes flicked from her face to the music box on the desk, then back again. "I see Emma's gift made it to the office," he said smoothly, stepping inside without waiting for permission. Nancy forced a smile. "It's beautiful, very intricate." "That's the point," Davidson replied, lowering himself into the chair opposite her. "The best tools don't announce themselves." She set the box aside, fighting to keep her tone neutral. "Why would Emma need a tool like this?" Davidson leaned back, steepling his fingers. "Do you know how many doors open when people hear a child speak to them in their mother tongue? When they realize she understands their culture, their idioms, their unspoken meanings, that music box is more than a keepsake, it's a bridge." Nancy stared at him. "It's also a microphone." He didn't flinch. "Yes, and that's why it's valuable. Do you have any idea what it's like negotiating with heads of state? With CEOs who control trillions in resources, they speak freely around children. They forget themselves. Emma can give us what no adult can, pure, unfiltered access." Her pulse thundered in her ears. "She's not a spy, Robert. She's a child. She's exceptional," he corrected, his voice hardening. "And exceptional children belong where their abilities are cultivated, not wasted." He reached into his briefcase and slid a glossy folder across her desk. On the cover was a crest she didn't recognize, the silver keys crossed over a globe. "The Global Youth Initiative, Switzerland." Nancy flipped through the pages. Photographs of palatial campuses against the Alps. Testimonials from alumni who were now ambassadors, Fortune 500 executives, heads of intelligence agencies. A timetable of immersion programs, linguistics, geopolitics, advanced analytics. "She would live there," Davidson said, his tone almost reverent. 10 months a year. The rest of the time she'd travel with me to key negotiations. By 16, she'd be shaping international deals. By 21, she'd be untouchable. Nancy closed the folder with a sharp snap, and I'd see her when scheduled visits, video calls. You'd be part of her life, but this, he gestured to the folder, would be her life. Her throat tightened. "No." Davidson's eyes cooled. "This isn't a request. The application is already in motion. The board will see it as a strategic investment. The Swiss program produces results, loyalty, influence." She would be the youngest they've ever accepted. Nancy stood, gripping the back of her chair to keep her hands steady. "If you try to take her, you'll what?" Davidson cut in, rising to match her stance. "Go back to cleaning offices? Try to fight me in court with what money? You forget, Nancy, I built your new life. The apartment, the school, the salary. Without me, it all collapses." For a moment, the room seemed to shrink around her. She could hear her own breathing, quick and shallow. "If you think I'll trade my daughter's childhood for your business agenda, you don't know me at all." Davidson's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "I know you better than you think. You're a survivor. Survivors make hard choices. You'll come around." He moved toward the door, then paused. "The program director will be in New York next month. I'll arrange for you and Emma to meet her. Think of it as opening your mind." When the door closed behind him, Nancy sank into her chair, the music box still pulsing faintly on her desk like a living thing. She stared at it for a long time, the weight of the folder heavy in her lap. And for the first time since stepping into Davidson's world, she wondered if she had walked straight into a cage and handed him the key. Nancy didn't go home after work that night. Instead, she walked for hours through the city, past glowing shop windows and steaming street carts, the cold November air biting at her cheeks. The music box sat in her bag like a ticking clock she couldn't silence. Davidson's words replayed in her head, his certainty, his casual claim over Emma's life, the Swiss program folder with its perfect, polished lies. Every instinct told her that if she didn't act now, she'd lose her daughter to a world she couldn't pull her back from. Her phone buzzed. A known number. "Ms. Rodriguez," a deep, accented voice said when she answered. "This is Khalid Al-Farsi." Nancy froze mid-step. "Mr. Al-Farsi?" "Yes. I believe your daughter, and I have already spoken." In Arabic, a hint of warmth colored the words. "I am in New York for 2 days. I request a private meeting. Tomorrow, 4 p.m. Plaza Hotel, Suite 2402. Her breath caught. "May I ask why?" "I'd have seen the program Davidson is proposing. For your daughter," Al-Farsi said evenly. "I know what it truly is, and I think we want the same thing to keep her out of it." The next day, Nancy kept Emma home from school under the pretense of illness. She dressed carefully, black slacks, a cream blouse, and the one blazer that made her feel as if she could stand her ground against anyone. They arrived at the plaza's ornate lobby 10 minutes early, marble floors gleaming under crystal chandeliers. A uniformed attendant led them to a suite where a tall man in a white thobe and gold-trimmed bisque rose to greet them. Khalid Al-Farsi's presence filled the room, not loud, but undeniable. His beard was streaked with silver, his eyes sharp and knowing. He bent slightly to Emma's level, greeting her in Arabic. She replied fluently, her small voice calm and assured. When they sat, Al-Farsi waved away the refreshments. "Ms. Rodriguez, I will not waste time. I have known Robert Davidson for many years. He is a man of remarkable vision, but also remarkable hunger. The Swiss program he champions is not education, it is grooming. They mold children into instruments for governments and corporations. In return, the sponsors own them permanently." Nancy's fingers tightened around the arm of her chair. "Why are you telling me this? You're his business partner." "Because I was once approached to sponsor such a child," Al-Farsi said quietly. "I refused. Family is sacred in my culture, and what the program does, it severs that bond." Emma listened silently, her gaze flicking between them. Al-Farsi leaned forward. "Davidson will not give up on her. She is unique 7 languages at 8 years old. A natural negotiator. To him, she is both a prize and a weapon. That is why I am offering you a choice." He slid a leather folder across the table. Inside was a formal offer letter. Director of Multilingual Communications, Linguistic Heritage Foundation, London. The salary was generous. But what caught Nancy's breath was the school brochure tucked beneath it. International Academy of London, with photos of children from 30 nations, smiling, learning, speaking in circles of diverse faces. She would be safe there? Nancy asked, her voice low. "Safer than here. The foundation is under my protection. The school celebrates her abilities, but does not exploit them. We leave for London tomorrow night on my jet. If you accept, we go directly. If you decline," his gaze darkened, "Davidson will take her, and you will not get her back." Nancy's pulse pounded. "He'll come after us. He will try. But I have leverage." The music box he gave Emma. "My security team has already confirmed it transmits to a private server. That is illegal, even in Davidson's world. And I have evidence it recorded more than Emmett captured conversations in his off. Ice that he would not want made public." Emma, who had been quiet until now, spoke. "Mama, I remember the man on the red phone. He liked me. Maybe he'll listen to us." Al-Farsi smiled faintly. "I already am, little one." Nancy closed the folder and looked at Emma. In her daughter's eyes she saw both fear and hope, an echo of that first day in Davidson's office. When answering a phone had changed everything, this was the second turning point, and maybe the last chance they'd have. "I'll need a few hours to get our things," Nancy said finally. "Be careful." Al-Farsi warned. "If Davidson suspects, he may move faster." Back in their apartment, Nancy packed with mechanical precision clothes, Emma's schoolwork, their passports, a few precious keepsakes. She deleted messages, cleared browsing history, and powered down her phone. By the time the sun dipped behind the skyline, the bag sat by the door. But then came the sound she dreaded, a firm knock. Nancy froze. Another knock, slower this time, deliberate. She opened the peephole. Robert Davidson stood in the hallway, holding a white envelope. He looked calm. Too calm. "We need to talk," he said through the door. "Now." Nancy's grip tightened on the chain lock. "We're busy. This won't wait. It's about Emma." He held up the envelope. "If you think you can walk away from me, Nancy, you should know I already filed custody papers, and I've spoken to her biological father." Her heart stopped. Davidson's eyes glittered. "You have one night to reconsider the Switzerland offer. Otherwise, next week, she's mine." Behind her, Emma's voice came softly from the bedroom. "Mama, who is it?" Nancy swallowed hard, forcing her voice to remain steady. "No one, me Hija." "Go back to packing." When she turned back, Davidson was still there, smiling like a man who believed he'd already won. Nancy didn't sleep that night. She sat in the armchair by the window, city lights flickering across her face, listening to the faint rhythm of Emma's breathing from the bedroom. The white envelope Davidson had waved in the hallway sat unopened. On the coffee table, a threat wrapped in expensive stationery. She didn't need to see inside to know what it contained: custody filings. probably signed and notarized, with every legal weapon Davidson could afford. By dawn, she'd made up her mind. If they stayed in New York even one more day, Davidson would have them boxed in through lawyers, through her landlord, through Carmichael Academy, and once he had Emma in his grasp, Switzerland would be just the beginning. At 6 a.m., Nancy, powered on the spare phone Hullett had given her the day before. It rang only once before he answered. "Are you ready?" he asked. "Yes," Nancy said, her voice steady despite the knot in her chest. "We're leaving today." "Good. My driver will collect you at 11 o'clock. Avoid your usual routines. He will take you to a safe location before we go to the airport." Nancy ended the call and moved quickly. She woke Emma gently, telling her they were going on a surprise trip. She dressed her in comfortable clothes, braided her hair, and packed the last of their things into two rolling suitcases. Every few minutes she checked the street from the window, scanning for unfamiliar cars. At 10:45, there was a knock on the door. 2 short raps, then a pause, then one long. The code Hullett had promised. She opened it to find a tall man in a charcoal suit, his expression unreadable. "Ms. Rodriguez," she nodded. "I'm Daniel. Mr. Alfars is head of security. We need to move quickly." They took the service elevator down to the basement garage. The air was cool and smelled faintly of oil. A black Mercedes idled near the far wall. As Daniel loaded the luggage into the trunk, Nancy felt a flicker of relief until she heard the echo of footsteps approaching fast. 2 men in dark coats turned the corner. One held a phone to his ear, the other scanned the garage. Nancy didn't know if they were Davidson's people, but the way Daniel's posture shifted told her he thought so. "Inside," he ordered, ushering her and Emma into the back seat. The driver pulled out before the trunk had fully closed. They wove through side streets, avoiding the main avenues, until they reached a private underground garage beneath a nondescript office building. Inside, Daniel switched their bags to a different car, a silver SUV with tinted windows. "This is the safe house," he said, guiding them through a side entrance to an elevator. "You'll stay here until we head to the airport." The apartment was small but clean, stocked with food, water, and a single suitcase already sitting on the kitchen counter. Nancy frowned. "What's this?" Daniel unzipped it to reveal neatly folded clothes, a stack of passports, and a bundle of cash secured with rubber bands. "Contingency," he said simply. "If Davidson tries to intercept you at the airport, you'll have alternate documents under different names." At 7 p.m., Daniel returned with the news. "The jet is ready, but there's a problem. Davidson has filed for an emergency court order to restrict Emma's travel. It will go through by morning." Nancy's heart slammed against her ribs. "Then we can't wait." "That's the plan," Daniel said, and handed her a plain Navy passport. "You are now Nancy Vega. Emma is your daughter, Sophia Vega. Keep those names until you're clear of U.S. airspace." They left through a rear garage exit and drove without headlights for 2 blocks. Before merging with traffic, every time they stopped at a light, Nancy searched the mirrors for a tail dot at the private terminal. A sleek Gulfstream waited, its engines already humming. They were halfway up the steps when headlights cut across the tarmac. Another black car skidded to a stop, doors flying open. Davidson stepped out, even from a distance. Nancy could see the fury in his face. "Nancy," his voice carried over the roar of the engines. "Don't do this. You're throwing away her future." Nancy didn't stop. She gripped Emma's hand tighter, urging her up the stairs. "You think Hullett will protect you?" Davidson's voice was sharp enough to pierce the wind. "You're just another piece on his board. At least I'm honest about what I want from her." Nancy turned at the doorway of the jet. For the first time, she saw something beyond control in his eyes: desperation, maybe even fear. "You were never honest," she said, "and you'll never own her." The door sealed shut behind them. Moments later, the jet lifted into the night, the city shrinking below until it was nothing but a scattering of lights on black water. Only then did Nancy let herself breathe. She looked at Emma, who was curled against her side, already asleep, outside. The Atlantic stretched toward London and a life Davidson couldn't reach, or so she prayed. But as she gazed out into the darkness, she couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the end of the fight, just the beginning of a new one. London did not feel like freedom at first. It felt like exile, rain-slick pavements, gray skies pressing low, and a constant whisper in Nancy's mind that Robert Davidson was somewhere plotting, waiting for the moment to strike. For the first few weeks, Nancy kept her movements tight and predictable, the walk from their flat in South Kensington to the International Academy, the tube to the Linguistic Heritage Foundation near Regent's Park, then home again. Every stranger's glance lingered along. Every unfamiliar car made her heartbeat spike. But slowly, the edges softened. Emma settled into the International Academy's rhythm as if she'd been born to it. Her days filled with cultural exchange, clubs, debates in multiple languages, and friends who treated her fluency as a wonder, not a threat. At work, Nancy discovered that Cullen's Foundation was more than a refuge. It was a purpose. She coordinated translation projects that preserved endangered languages, linking indigenous communities with global platforms. It was the kind of work she'd once dreamed of. Before her life had been derailed, 6 months passed. The legal papers. Cullen's team had filed under the Vega Identities Health firm. There were no more calls from Davidson. No surprise cars waiting outside their building. News from New York came in fragments, rumors of investors pulling out, of investigations into corporate espionage. It seemed the music box's recordings had done their damage. Then, one spring afternoon, as cherry blossoms spilled onto the cobblestones outside the foundation, Nancy's assistant appeared at her office door. "There's a woman here asking for you," she said. "She doesn't have an appointment, but she insists it's urgent. Says her name is Sophia Davidson." Nancy's hands stilled on the keyboard. She hadn't expected that name to ever cross her path again. "Send her in," she said, her voice steady even as her pulse quickened. Sophia entered with the composed elegance of someone used to walking into boardrooms and leaving with exactly what she wanted. But there was no arrogance in her eyes, only an unsettling mix of exhaustion and determination. "My father is dying," she said without preamble. "Pancreatic cancer, months at most." Nancy said nothing, waiting. "He talks about Emma constantly. Not about taking her anymore. That obsession, it's shifted. He's been working on something. A project." Sophia placed a thick leather-bound binder on the desk and slid it toward her. "He calls it the Rodriguez method." Nancy hesitated, then opened it. Inside were pages of meticulously typed notes, charts, and diagrams detailing language acquisition strategies, many of them eerily familiar. They were her methods, the ones she'd used with Emma since birth: early immersion, cross-language association, emotional reinforcement. Davidson had documented everything, down to the bedtime routines and the multilingual lullabies. "He's concluded," Sophia said quietly, "that the emotional bond between parent and child is the most critical factor in developing exceptional linguistic ability, not isolation, not institutional training." "You were right. He's admitting it, in his way." Nancy's throat tightened. "Why bring this to me?" "Because I've taken over Davidson International, and I'm dismantling the Swiss program," Sophia said. "But this research, it could become something good, a program that keeps families intact, that gives children opportunities without breaking them apart. I want you to lead it." The room seemed to still around Nancy. She thought of Emma laughing with her friends at school, switching between Hindi and Japanese without missing a beat. She thought of Cullen's warning about the Swiss program's reach, of the parents who might still be seduced by its promises. "And my father?" she asked. Sophia's expression softened. "He wants to see you, not to bargain, just to explain himself. I can't promise it will be easy." 2 days later, Nancy stood at the doorway of a quiet private hospital room in Geneva. Davidson looked smaller than she remembered, the sharp lines of his suit replaced by the loose drape of hospital linens. But his eyes, those calculating, relentless eyes, still held their focus. "You saved her," he said without introduction. "From me, from the program. I hated you for it." Nancy stayed silent, letting him speak. "Then I realized," he continued, his voice thin but steady, "you didn't just save her, you preserved the very thing that made her extraordinary. I spent my life thinking potential had to be shaped by force. You proved it could flourish through love. That's the legacy I want now." There was no apology in his words. Davidson was not a man who dealt in apologies, but there was truth, and perhaps, in his own way, regret. Nancy left Geneva with the binder under her arm and a choice heavy in her mind. 3 months later, she stood on a stage in London, addressing a hall filled with educators, linguists, and parents from around the world. Behind her, the new crest gleamed, a globe encircled by two hands, not the keys. The Rodriguez method was no longer a private practice, it was a movement. Emma sat in the front row, watching with quiet pride. "My daughter once answered a phone call in perfect Arabic and changed both our lives," Nancy told the audience. What I've learned since is that the greatest gift we can give any child is not opportunity alone, but the freedom to grow without fear of losing the people who love them most. The applause rose like a wave. In that moment, Nancy knew Davidson's shadow was gone, not because he had disappeared, but because she had transformed what he had tried to take into something he could never own. Emma smiled up at her, and Nancy thought of all the languages her daughter knew. Yet in that look, in that moment, no translation was needed at all.